A police dog stops dead in front of a little girl, and what he smells makes the officer drop his flashlight. But this wasn't just any detection. This was a moment that would expose a predator, save a life, and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes have 4 legs and an instinct that defies all logic. In the next few minutes, you're going to witness how one dog's incredible sense of smell didn't just find a missing child. It uncovered something far darker lurking in the shadows. And it all started with a routine call that became anything but routine. The dispatch radio crackled at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night that Officer James Martinez would never forget. He was parked near the edge of the city, running routine patrols with Rex, his German Shepherd partner of 6 years. They'd worked together through countless calls, drug busts, missing persons, domestic disputes. But tonight felt different somehow. The autumn air was crisp, almost suffocating, and the streets were eerily quiet. All units? We have a report of a missing child. 7-year-old Emma Richardson, last seen near the old Millbrook Industrial Complex approximately 30 minutes ago. Parents report she was playing in the yard when she wandered off. Search and rescue is en route. Any available units respond. Martinez's stomach tightened. A missing child. Those words always hit different. He'd been a cop for 15 years, but the cases involving kids, they stayed with you. They haunted you. He reached over and felt Rex's warm fur, and the dog's ears perked up instantly. Rex knew that tone in his handler's voice. Something was happening. Unit 23 responding. Martinez spoke into his radio, already shifting the cruiser into drive. The Millbrook Industrial Complex was abandoned, had been for nearly a decade. It was the kind of place that attracted trouble. Squatters, drug dealers, teenagers looking for thrills. The kind of place where a 7-year-old girl could disappear and vanish into the darkness, like she'd never existed at all. Martinez's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he navigated the winding roads toward the complex. Rex stood in the back of the cruiser, his nose pressed against the window. The dog could sense the urgency, the shift in energy. He'd been trained for search and rescue, and something in the air told him this wasn't a drill. This was real. When they arrived at the Millbrook complex, Martinez could see the first responders already setting up. Flashlights cut through the darkness like searching fingers. Parents' voices, desperate, broken, calling out their daughter's name into the void. Emma's mother was sobbing uncontrollably, while her father stood rigid, his face a mask of controlled terror. Martinez had seen that look before. It was the look of a parent whose world had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Officer Martinez," one of the sergeants called out. "We need your dog. We've got a recent article of clothing, Emma's jacket. Can Rex track her?" Martinez nodded and opened the back door. Rex jumped out, his entire body vibrating with purpose. This was what he was born to do. This was what they'd trained for together. Countless hours, countless scenarios. But nothing truly prepares you for the real thing. Nothing prepares you for the weight of a child's life, depending on your dog's nose. Martinez held the jacket up to Rex's snout, letting him catch the scent. The dog inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, his entire being focusing on that one smell. For a moment, everything else faded away. The other officers, the desperate parents, the cold night air. It was just Martinez and Rex, connected by an invisible thread of trust and purpose. "Find her, boy," Martinez whispered. "Find Emma." Rex's head snapped up, and he began moving toward the industrial complex with a determination that made Martinez's breath catch. The dog wasn't wandering or sniffing randomly. He was tracking with absolute certainty, pulling Martinez forward into the darkness of the abandoned buildings. But what Rex was about to discover would shatter everything Martinez thought he knew about his partner, and about the real danger lurking in those shadows. The abandoned warehouse loomed before them like a skeletal giant, its broken windows staring down, like hollow eyes. Martinez and Rex moved through the darkness, their flashlight beam cutting through the thick silence. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of rust, decay, and something else. Something that made even Martinez's untrained nose wrinkle in disgust. Rex pulled forward with unwavering focus, his paws clicking against the concrete floor. They passed through the main warehouse floor, stepping over scattered debris and rusted machinery. The dog's breathing was steady, controlled, his entire body language screaming absolute concentration. This wasn't the casual sniffing of a routine patrol. This was a dog operating at peak intensity, locked onto a scent trail that only he could perceive. "Good boy, Rex. Find her," Martinez encouraged, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They descended deeper into the complex, moving toward the back sections where the darkness seemed almost tangible. Martinez's flashlight beam bounced off concrete walls covered in graffiti and decades of grime. The temperature dropped as they moved further inside, and Martinez could see his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. But then something shifted. Rex's pace slowed. His ears, which had been alert and forward-facing, began to twitch. His body went rigid, and he stopped moving entirely. Martinez had worked with Rex for 6 years, and he knew every nuance of his partner's behavior. This wasn't the normal alert of finding a scent. This was something different. Something deeper. The dog's hackles rose slightly along his spine. His tail, which had been wagging with purpose moments before, went completely still. Rex's nose was working overtime, inhaling and exhaling in quick, sharp bursts. His eyes were fixed on a darkened corridor ahead, the kind of corridor that seemed to swallow light itself. "What is it, boy?" Martinez whispered, though he wasn't sure why he was whispering. Something about Rex's behavior had triggered an ancient instinct in him, the same instinct that had kept his ancestors alive on the savannah. The instinct that screamed danger, real danger. Rex took one tentative step forward, then stopped completely. His entire body went rigid, frozen like a statue carved from muscle and fur. Martinez had never seen his partner like this. In all their years together, through all the calls and the training sessions and the real-world scenarios, Rex had never displayed this level of intensity, mixed with what could only be described as primal caution. The dog's ears rotated backward slightly, and a low, almost inaudible growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Not aggressive, not threatening, but warning. Pure, undiluted warning. Martinez felt the hair on the back of his own neck stand on end. His hand instinctively moved to the radio at his belt, but he hesitated. What would he say? That his dog was acting strange? That something felt wrong? He needed more information. He needed to understand what Rex was detecting. They moved forward slowly, cautiously. The corridor opened into what appeared to be an old storage room. Boxes were stacked haphazardly against the walls, and the smell grew stronger, that same acrid, wrong smell that had hit Martinez when they first entered the warehouse. But now there was something else mixed in with it, something sweet and metallic that made his stomach turn. And then Rex stopped dead in his tracks. The dog stood completely motionless in front of a small figure huddled in the corner of the storage room. Even in the dim light of Martinez's flashlight, he could make out the silhouette, small, terrified, trembling. a little girl in a pink dress, her hair matted and her face streaked with tears and dirt. Emma. But Rex wasn't moving toward her. He wasn't doing what he'd been trained to do. Instead, the dog remained frozen, his body positioned protectively between Martinez and the child, his entire being vibrating with an intensity that was almost supernatural. His nose was still working frantically, pulling in scent after scent from the darkness around them. And that's when Martinez realized what was happening. Rex wasn't just detecting Emma. He was detecting something else. Something that made his dog's every instinct scream that danger was still present. That the threat hadn't passed. That somewhere in this darkness, something predatory was lurking. Martinez's hand trembled as he raised his flashlight higher, trying to penetrate the shadows around them. His other hand moved to his service weapon, though he wasn't sure what he was defending against. The beam of light swept across the storage room, illuminating boxes, old machinery, abandoned equipment. And then the flashlight caught something that made Martinez's blood run cold. A sleeping bag? A camping stove? Empty food containers, signs of habitation, signs that someone had been living here. Someone had been waiting here. That's when Emma's terrified voice cut through the darkness. "Officer, officer, please. He said he was coming back. He said..." But Martinez barely heard her. Because in that moment, as the full weight of the situation crashed down on him, his flashlight slipped from his trembling fingers. It fell to the concrete floor with a deafening clatter, the beam spinning wildly before settling on a corner of the room that had been hidden in shadow. And there, in that beam of light, Martinez saw something that made his heart stop. Because what Rex had detected wasn't just a missing child, it was a predator. And the predator's lair was exactly where they were standing. The flashlight beam illuminated a wall covered in photographs. Dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, all of them children, all of them girls. Some photos were recent, printed on glossy paper and pinned haphazardly to the concrete. Others were older, yellowed and faded, their edges curled with age. But they all told the same horrifying story. Martinez felt his knees go weak. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was something far more sinister. This was a predator's collection. This was the visual record of a monster's obsession. Emma whimpered in the corner, her small voice breaking through Martinez's shock. "Officer, please, he's coming back soon. He always comes back at midnight. He said if I tried to leave, he'd find me no matter where I went." Martinez's training kicked in, overriding the horror. He moved quickly toward Emma, but Rex's body immediately tensed. The dog didn't growl or attack, but his positioning made it clear. "Stay alert. The danger isn't over." "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm a police officer. You're safe now," Martinez said, keeping his voice calm and steady despite the ice water running through his veins. He reached down and gently took Emma's hand. The girl was ice cold, trembling violently, her eyes wide with a trauma that no 7-year-old should ever experience. But Rex wasn't satisfied with the reassurance. The dog's ears were still rotating, catching sounds that human ears couldn't detect. His nose continued its frantic work, pulling in information from the stale air of the warehouse. And then, suddenly, his entire body language shifted. Rex's head snapped toward the corridor they'd just come through. In that same instant, Martinez heard it too. A sound so faint that it might have been nothing. But Rex had heard it first, and that was all the confirmation Martinez needed. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the warehouse corridors. The predator was coming back. Martinez's mind raced. He was a trained officer. But he was also alone in an abandoned warehouse with a traumatized child and a dog. Backup was still minutes away. He'd called it in when they found Emma, but response time in this part of the city was never quick. He had maybe 2 minutes before whoever was walking through that warehouse reached them. He made a split-second decision. "Emma, I need you to stay right here with Rex, okay? Rex is going to protect you. He's a police dog, and he's very, very good at his job. I need you to be brave for just a little bit longer." Emma's eyes widened in terror. No, please don't leave me." But Martinez was already moving, positioning himself between the corridor and the child. His hand rested on his service weapon, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He needed to see who this was. He needed to understand the threat level. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then a figure emerged from the darkness of the corridor. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a lean, muscular build that suggested a man who took care of himself. His face was obscured by shadow, but Martinez could make out the general features: sharp cheekbones, dark hair, cold eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He was wearing work clothes, dark pants, a dark jacket, and he was carrying something in his right hand. Something long and metallic that caught the dim light. A crowbar. "Well, the man said, his voice smooth and measured, almost conversational. "It seems we have a visitor, and not just any visitor, a police officer. How delightful." Martinez's hand moved to his weapon, but he kept his voice level. "I'm Officer James Martinez, LAPD. You're under arrest for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. Put the crowbar down and get on the ground, now." The man smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A smile that spoke of someone who had crossed over into a place where normal human morality no longer applied. "You know, officer, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I've learned one very important lesson. The police always arrive too late. They always find the body, but they never find the killer until I want them to." That's when Rex moved. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't do any of the things that a typical police dog might do when confronted with a threat. Instead, Rex simply moved. A blur of muscle and fur that crossed the distance between himself and the predator in less than a second. The man barely had time to raise the crowbar before Rex was on him, not attacking in the traditional sense, but using his body as a battering ram. The force of the impact sent the man flying backward into the corridor. The crowbar clattered to the ground, skittering across the concrete. But what happened next was what truly revealed the extraordinary nature of Rex's instincts. As the man fell backward, he stumbled over a piece of debris on the floor. His arms windmilled, trying to regain his balance, and he fell hard against the concrete. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, and for a moment, he lay gasping on the ground. That's when Rex did something that would later baffle every expert who reviewed the security footage. The dog didn't continue the attack. Instead, Rex positioned himself directly over the fallen man, his body rigid, his eyes locked on the predator's face. The dog's nose was working frantically, pulling in scent after scent from the man's body. And then, with a precision that seemed almost surgical, Rex lowered his massive head, and his jaws closed around the man's right wrist. Not biting, not breaking the skin, but holding with a pressure that was absolutely unmistakable. "Don't move. Don't even think about moving." Martinez was already moving, his weapon drawn, his training overriding the shock of what he'd just witnessed. He moved quickly to the fallen man and secured his hands behind his back with handcuffs, reading him his rights in a voice that sounded strange and distant to his own ears. but his mind was already grappling with a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. How had Rex known? How had his dog detected not just the presence of a predator, but the specific threat level? How had Rex understood, with such absolute certainty, exactly what needed to be done in that moment? As Martinez secured the suspect and called for backup, he looked back at Emma, who was now sobbing with a mixture of relief and trauma. He looked at Rex, who was still maintaining his grip on the predator's wrist, his eyes never wavering, his body never relaxing. And in that moment, Martinez understood something profound. Rex hadn't just found a missing child. Rex had detected something far more fundamental: the scent of evil itself, the predatory nature of a human being who had crossed over into darkness. And Rex had responded with an instinct that transcended training, that transcended logic. Rex had responded with the ancient, primal understanding of what it meant to protect the innocent. But the most extraordinary part of this story was still to come. Because what happened next would prove that Rex's abilities went far beyond anything any expert had ever documented. The backup arrived within minutes. Sirens wailing, lights flashing, the cavalry arriving in the nick of time. Paramedics rushed to Emma, wrapping her in thermal blankets and beginning the careful process of assessing her physical and emotional state. Their voices were gentle, practiced, designed to soothe rather than alarm. One paramedic, a woman named Lisa with kind eyes and years of experience working with traumatized children, knelt beside Emma and spoke to her in soft, measured tones. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. We're going to take you to the hospital, and we're going to make sure you get the best care possible. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Emma Richardson." "That's a beautiful name, Emma. I'm Lisa, and I'm going to stay with you the whole time, okay? You're not alone anymore." Social workers were called. The crime scene was secured, and the predator, later identified as Marcus Holloway, a man with a history of disappearances following him across 3 states, was transported to the police station for interrogation. As the officers placed him in the back of the patrol car, Holloway's composure remained eerily intact. He didn't struggle, didn't resist, didn't show any of the emotional responses that typically accompanied arrest. Instead, he simply sat in the back seat, staring straight ahead, his expression blank and distant. But Martinez couldn't stop thinking about Rex. Even as the warehouse was being processed as a crime scene, even as detectives were photographing the wall of children's pictures and cataloging the evidence of Holloway's depravity, Martinez kept his hand on Rex's collar. The dog had returned to his normal demeanor once the threat was neutralized, but something had fundamentally shifted in their dynamic. Martinez found himself looking at his partner with new eyes, seeing him not just as a trained police dog, but as something more, something that defied easy explanation. The wall of photographs was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the crime scene. There were easily 300 images, some dating back nearly 2 decades based on the photographic quality and the fashion choices visible in the background of some shots. The photographs weren't just random pictures of children. They were meticulously organized, arranged in a pattern that suggested a deeply disturbed mind engaged in systematic documentation. Some photos showed children who appeared to be in distress. Others showed them in various states of captivity. And interspersed among the photographs were newspaper clippings, missing person reports, and handwritten notes that detailed Holloway's observations and fantasies. Detective Sarah Morrison, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience, stood before the wall and felt something break inside her. She'd worked hundreds of cases, But nothing had prepared her for this level of depravity. She pulled out her phone and called for additional resources, her voice steady despite the emotion roiling beneath the surface. "We need forensic photographers, evidence technicians, and a full crime scene analysis team," she said into the phone. "And we need to contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I believe we're looking at multiple victims spanning several states and possibly several countries." As the evidence was being cataloged, Martinez remained with Rex, moving through the warehouse and observing the meticulous documentation of evil. There were journals, dozens of them, filled with Holloway's handwriting. Detailed accounts of his activities, his fantasies, his plans for the future. There were recordings, audio cassettes labeled with dates and initials that corresponded to the photographs on the wall. There was a map of the city with red pins marking locations, each pin presumably representing either a victim or a potential hunting ground. "That was incredible work, Rex," Martinez whispered, running his fingers through the dog's fur. Rex's tail wagged slightly, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the warehouse as if he was still on high alert, still protecting, still vigilant. The dog seemed to understand, on some level, that they had entered into territory that required constant awareness, constant readiness. One of the evidence technicians, a young man named David Chen, approached Martinez with a tablet displaying preliminary forensic findings. "Officer Martinez, we've identified at least 47 distinct victims based on the photographs and the journals. Some of them are still missing. Some of them—" He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. "Some of them are dead," Martinez finished quietly. "Yes, sir. Based on the dates in the journals and the progression of the photographs, it appears that Holloway's activities have escalated significantly over the past 5 years. The frequency of his crimes has increased, and the violence associated with those crimes has become more severe." Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a kidnapping case. This was one of the largest serial predator operations ever uncovered in the history of the department. And if Rex hadn't detected Holloway's presence in the warehouse, if they hadn't found Emma when they did, there would likely have been many more victims. 3 days later. It wasn't until 3 days later, during the interrogation of Marcus Holloway, that things took a truly extraordinary turn. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, deliberately so. The walls were painted a pale gray that was designed to be psychologically neutral, neither comforting nor threatening. A single metal table sat in the center of the room, with 2 chairs on one side and one on the other. A recording device was mounted in the corner, capturing every word, every gesture, every micro-expression that crossed Holloway's face. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator on the case, had been questioning Holloway for hours. She was a meticulous investigator with a reputation for getting results. And she approached this interrogation with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. She had a thick folder filled with evidence: photographs, journal entries, DNA results, witness statements. But she was in no rush to present all of it at once. Instead, she was taking her time, building her case methodically, allowing Holloway to reveal himself through his own words and reactions. The predator was calm, almost eerily composed, answering questions in a measured tone that suggested he'd prepared for this moment. He denied nothing. There was no point. The evidence was overwhelming. The photographs on the wall, the DNA evidence, the testimony of Emma and 2 other girls who had been found in a secondary location after police obtained a warrant to search Holloway's apartment. "Tell me about your childhood, Marcus," Detective Chen said, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had conducted thousands of interviews. Tell me about your family. Tell me about the first time you experienced these urges." Holloway leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You want to understand me, Detective? You want to find the moment where I became what I am? I'm afraid you're looking for something that doesn't exist. There was no traumatic incident, no abuse, no psychological break. I was born this way. I've always known that I was different, that I wanted things that other people didn't want, that I saw the world in a way that most people couldn't comprehend." "You're talking about your attraction to children," Chen said bluntly. "I'm talking about my understanding of power," Holloway corrected. "Children are the ultimate expression of vulnerability. They're small, they're weak, they're dependent on adults for everything. And there's a certain elegance in the way they respond to someone who has absolute power over them. The fear, the confusion, the way they try to understand why someone they should be able to trust is doing these things to them. It's intoxicating." Detective Chen felt her stomach turn, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd been trained to remain objective, to not allow her personal revulsion to interfere with her investigative work. But in moments like this, it was almost impossible. "When did you first act on these urges?" she asked. "I was 17, Holloway said matter-of-factly. "A neighbor's daughter. She was 9 years old. I'd been watching her for months, learning her routines, understanding her vulnerabilities. One day, I knew the moment was right. I knew she would be alone, and I took her." "What happened to her?" Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer based on the case files. "She's in the woods outside of Portland," Holloway said with the same casual tone one might use to discuss the weather. "I buried her there about 15 years ago. No one's ever found her. No one ever will." Detective Chen's jaw tightened, but she continued. "Tell me about the others." What followed was a confession that would ultimately span more than 18 hours of interrogation. Holloway detailed his crimes with a level of specificity and emotional detachment that was deeply disturbing. He described his victims by name, by age, by the specific details of what he'd done to them. He discussed his methods of selection, his techniques for gaining their trust, his strategies for ensuring their silence through a combination of threats, manipulation, and psychological abuse. But then Detective Chen asked a question that would change everything. "How did you know Officer Martinez was in the warehouse? How did you know to come back at that exact moment?" Holloway's composure remained intact. But there was a subtle shift in his body language. His shoulders tensed slightly. His eyes flickered with something that might have been concern. "I didn't know, Detective. I always come back at midnight. It's routine. It's part of the ritual. I've done it for 15 years, and I've never been interrupted. I thought I was untouchable. I thought I'd achieved a level of sophistication in my activities that placed me beyond the reach of law enforcement. But you were interrupted," Chen pressed, leaning forward slightly. "You came back, and Officer Martinez was there with the girl. How did that happen?" Holloway was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been fear. "The dog," he said quietly. "There was something wrong with the dog. When I came around the corner and saw that animal standing over me, it was like it could see inside me, like it knew exactly what I was. I've never experienced anything like that before. It was like the dog could smell my intentions, my nature, everything I've done." Detective Chen exchanged a glance with Martinez, who was observing the interrogation through one-way glass. In that moment, Both officers understood that they had witnessed something that transcended the normal bounds of police work and animal behavior. "What do you mean? The dog could smell your nature?" Chen asked, pressing the point. "I mean that I've spent my entire adult life learning to hide," Holloway said, his voice taking on an almost philosophical tone. "I've learned to present a normal face to the world. I've learned to say the right things, to make the right expressions, to appear human in a way that passes inspection. But that dog saw through all of that. It didn't see Officer Martinez's partner or a trained police animal. It saw what I am, a predator, something that hunts, something that kills." 2 weeks later, the real revelation came 2 weeks later. A forensic psychologist named Dr. Robert Castellano, who specialized in predatory behavior, requested a meeting with Martinez after reviewing the case files. Dr. Castellano was a renowned expert who had consulted on hundreds of criminal cases, and he had a theory that he wanted to discuss. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of measured demeanor that came from decades of studying the darkest aspects of human nature. They met in a small office at the police department, away from the noise and chaos of the main bullpen. Dr. Castellano carried with him several thick folders and a laptop computer. He set up his materials with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. "Officer Martinez, I've reviewed everything about this case. The crime scene, the interrogation transcripts, the behavioral patterns of Marcus Holloway. And I've been studying the accounts of how Rex behaved during the search and rescue operation." Dr. Castellano began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of expertise. "What I have discovered is that Rex's behavior followed a pattern that we've only recently begun to understand in the scientific community." He opened his laptop and pulled up a series of research papers and scientific studies. "There's emerging research suggesting that certain dogs, particularly those with specific genetic markers and extensive training, may be capable of detecting what we call predatory pheromones." Martinez leaned forward, his interest immediately piqued. "Predatory pheromones? I'm not familiar with that term." "It's relatively new terminology," Dr. Castellano explained, adjusting his glasses. "You see, humans emit chemical compounds through their skin, their breath, their sweat. Compounds that reflect their emotional and psychological state. We've long known that dogs can detect fear, anxiety, and aggression through these chemical signals. Dogs have approximately 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to about 6 million in humans. They can detect scents at concentrations as low as 1 part per trillion. To put that in perspective, if you dissolved a teaspoon of sugar in 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, a dog could still detect it." Dr. Castellano pulled up a series of brain scans and neurochemical diagrams. "But what's newer is the evidence that dogs may be able to detect something far more specific. The neurochemical signature of someone with predatory intent. When a human being has spent years, decades in Holloway's case, engaging in predatory behavior, it creates specific neurochemical patterns in their brain and body. These patterns leak out through their pheromones. The brain chemistry of a predator is fundamentally different from that of a normal human being." He showed Martinez studies from the University of Helsinki, the Max Planck Institute, and several universities in North America. The research was compelling and detailed, filled with data and statistical analysis that suggested a clear correlation between predatory behavior and detectable neurochemical changes. "These patterns leak out through their pheromones," Dr. Castellano continued. "And dogs, with their extraordinary olfactory capabilities, may be able to detect these patterns with remarkable accuracy. In fact, Some of our research suggests that dogs may be better at detecting these patterns than any technology we've currently developed. You're saying Rex could smell that Holloway was a predator? Martinez asked, struggling to wrap his mind around the concept. I'm saying it's highly probable, Dr. Castellano replied. And not just that he was a predator, but the specific level of threat he posed. Dogs don't just detect the presence of danger. They detect the nature of danger. They understand, on some level, whether a threat is defensive or predatory, whether someone is dangerous because they're frightened or dangerous because they're inherently violent. Dr. Castellano pulled up video footage of Rex's behavior in the warehouse. He played it frame by frame, analyzing every movement, every shift in the dog's body language. Look at Rex's positioning when Holloway enters the corridor, Dr. Castellano said, pointing at the screen. The dog doesn't bark, doesn't growl, doesn't display any of the typical warning behaviors we'd expect from a protection dog. Instead, Rex positions himself between Holloway and Emma. His body is relaxed, but his attention is absolute. His nose is working frantically, pulling in information from the air around him. What's he detecting? Martinez asked. Everything, Dr. Castellano said. Holloway's emotional state, his neurochemical composition, the specific combination of chemicals that indicate predatory intent, the scent of fear mixed with anticipation, the smell of someone who has spent decades engaging in violent, predatory behavior. All of that information is being processed by Rex's extraordinary olfactory system, and his brain is making a determination about the level of threat. Dr. Castellano continued his analysis. When Holloway raises the crowbar, Rex responds not with aggression, but with tactical precision. He doesn't bite, he doesn't attack. He uses his body as a tool to neutralize the threat. And then, once the threat is neutralized, he maintains control through positioning and psychological pressure. This is the behavior of a dog that understands, with absolute certainty, exactly what needs to be done in any given situation. So Rex's training enabled him to do this? Martinez asked. Partially, Dr. Castellano said. But what I'm suggesting is that Rex's extraordinary olfactory capabilities, combined with his training and his intelligence, created a perfect storm of capability. Rex wasn't just responding to what he'd been trained to do. Rex was responding to something far more fundamental, the detection of a predator. And his response was calibrated to the specific threat level posed by that predator. Dr. Castellano pulled up more research papers. There's a study from the University of Stockholm that examined the neurochemical profiles of violent offenders. They found that individuals who had engaged in predatory violence over extended periods showed distinct patterns in their neurochemistry. Elevated levels of certain hormones, reduced levels of others. A specific combination of chemical markers that was virtually identical across all subjects studied, regardless of their personal background or history. And dogs can detect this? Martinez asked. Certain dogs, yes, Dr. Castellano confirmed. Dogs with the right genetic predisposition, the right training, and the right level of intelligence. Rex appears to be one of those dogs. In fact, based on what I've reviewed in this case, I would argue that Rex possesses one of the most extraordinary olfactory capabilities I've ever encountered in a canine. Over the following months, as the case against Holloway proceeded through the legal system, Martinez began to understand the full scope of what had happened that night in the warehouse. Rex hadn't just found a missing child. Rex had detected the presence of evil itself, not in some mystical or supernatural sense, but in a very real, very biological way that science was only beginning to understand. The case attracted international attention. Criminologists, animal behaviorists, and forensic psychologists All wanted to study Rex, to understand how the dog had been able to do what he'd done. Universities requested access to the case files. The FBI became involved, recognizing the potential implications of Rex's abilities for their own criminal investigations. Television documentaries were made. Scientific journals published peer-reviewed papers analyzing the case. Rex became famous, not as a celebrity, but as a living example of the extraordinary capabilities that existed within the animal kingdom. Dr. Castellano published a landmark paper titled Predatory Pheromone Detection in Canines, the case of Officer Martinez's Rex, in the Journal of Forensic Psychology. The paper detailed the neurochemical markers of predatory behavior and the mechanisms by which a dog's extraordinary olfactory system might detect these markers. It became one of the most cited papers in the field, spawning dozens of follow-up studies and research initiatives. Universities began developing programs to identify and train dogs with Rex's capabilities. The FBI established a new division dedicated to what they called predatory detection canines. Police departments across the country began requesting access to Rex's training protocols and genetic information, hoping to replicate his success. But for Martinez, none of that mattered. What mattered was that on that cold autumn night, his partner had done something that transcended training, that transcended logic, that transcended everything Martinez thought he understood about the relationship between humans and animals. Rex had protected the innocent, and in doing so, he had revealed a truth that would reshape the future of law enforcement. That sometimes the most powerful tools we have for detecting danger come not from technology or human intelligence, but from the ancient, primal instincts of our animal partners. That sometimes the most extraordinary capabilities exist not in laboratories or in computer systems, but in the loyal eyes of a dog who has dedicated his life to serving and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. But the story wasn't over, because what happened next would prove that Rex's abilities were even more extraordinary than anyone had realized. And it would lead to a discovery that would change the entire field of criminal investigation forever. 6 months after the arrest of Marcus Holloway, Officer James Martinez stood in front of a packed auditorium at the Los Angeles Police Academy. The room was filled with police officers, detectives, FBI agents, forensic psychologists, and representatives from law enforcement agencies across the country. News cameras lined the back of the auditorium, their red lights blinking steadily as they recorded the proceedings. This was a historic moment. The official unveiling of what would become known as the Rex Protocol, a revolutionary approach to criminal detection that would fundamentally change how law enforcement identified and apprehended serial predators. But Martinez's mind wasn't on the presentation. His mind was on the dog sitting beside him, alert and calm, his dark eyes scanning the auditorium with the quiet confidence of someone who had already proven himself capable of extraordinary things. Rex had aged noticeably in the 6 months since the warehouse incident. His muzzle was graying, and there was a slight stiffness in his gait that suggested the years of intense work were beginning to take their toll on his body. But his eyes remained sharp, and his presence commanded respect from everyone in the room. "Officer Martinez," the moderator said, gesturing for him to approach the podium. "Tell us about the night you found Emma Richardson. Tell us about Rex." Martinez took a deep breath and stepped forward. He'd given this account many times in the past 6 months, to detectives, to prosecutors, to journalists, to researchers. But this time felt different. This time, he was speaking not just about a single case, but about something far larger. Something that would have implications for law enforcement for decades to come. 6 months ago, I didn't understand what Rex was capable of. Martinez began, his voice steady and measured. I knew he was a good dog. I knew he was well trained. But I didn't understand that he possessed capabilities that transcended anything I'd ever encountered in my 23 years of police work. He paused, looking down at Rex, who was watching him with an intensity that suggested the dog understood the significance of the moment. When Rex detected Marcus Holloway's presence in that warehouse, he wasn't just detecting a threat. He was detecting something far more specific. He was detecting the neurochemical signature of a predator, a man who had spent decades engaging in violence against the most vulnerable members of our society. And Rex responded with a precision and an understanding that saved a child's life and led to the identification and apprehension of one of the most prolific serial predators in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. The auditorium was silent. Every person in the room understood the significance of what Martinez was saying. But here's what's important, Martinez continued. Rex didn't do this because he was following orders. Rex didn't do this because he'd been trained to do it. Rex did this because he understood, on some fundamental level, that there was a child in danger and that there was a predator who needed to be stopped. Rex understood his purpose, and Rex executed that purpose with extraordinary skill and courage. 3 weeks later, Dr. Robert Castellano published a groundbreaking study in collaboration with researchers from the University of California, Stanford, and MIT. The study, titled Neurochemical Markers of Predatory Violence: Implications for Canine Detection and Criminal Investigation, presented compelling evidence that predatory behavior created distinct, detectable neurochemical signatures that dogs could be trained to identify. The research was based on blood samples collected from 63 violent offenders, including Marcus Holloway. The researchers analyzed the neurochemical composition of these samples and compared them to control groups of non-violent individuals. The results were striking. Predatory offenders showed significantly elevated levels of certain neurotransmitters and hormones associated with aggression and dominance. They showed reduced levels of neurotransmitters associated with empathy and social bonding. Most importantly, they showed a specific combination of neurochemical markers that was virtually identical across all subjects, regardless of their personal background, age, or history. These neurochemical markers leaked into the bloodstream and were subsequently emitted through the skin, breath, and sweat. And dogs, with their extraordinary olfactory capabilities, could be trained to detect these markers with remarkable accuracy. The implications were staggering. For the first time in the history of law enforcement, there was scientific evidence suggesting that it might be possible to identify predatory individuals before they committed crimes, not through psychological evaluation or behavioral assessment, but through the simple act of allowing a trained dog to smell them. The study sparked immediate interest from law enforcement agencies around the world. The FBI established a task force dedicated to developing the Rex protocol. The British National Crime Agency began recruiting and training dogs specifically for predatory detection. Interpol issued a recommendation that all member countries consider implementing similar programs. But not everyone was enthusiastic about the development. Civil liberties organizations raised concerns about the implications of using dogs to identify predatory individuals. They argued that the science was too new, too untested to be used in criminal investigations. They worried about false positives and the potential for the technology to be abused. They raised questions about privacy and about the rights of individuals to be protected from identification based on their neurochemistry. These were legitimate concerns, and they sparked a national debate about the future of criminal investigation and the role of science in law enforcement. Academic conferences were held. papers were published. Experts testified before Congress about the implications of the Rex Protocol. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the undeniable success of the protocol in identifying and apprehending dangerous individuals. Within a year of the warehouse incident, the Rex Protocol had been implemented in police departments across the country. Specialized breeding programs were established to identify dogs with a genetic predisposition for predatory detection. Training facilities were created to teach these dogs the specific skills they would need to identify predatory individuals. And law enforcement agencies began using these dogs in their investigations. The results were remarkable. In Los Angeles, the Rex Protocol led to the identification and arrest of 17 additional predators who were operating in the city. In New York, the program identified a serial killer who had evaded law enforcement for nearly a decade. In Chicago, a task force using Rex Protocol dogs identified a network of predators operating across multiple states, leading to the rescue of 43 victims and the arrest of 31 offenders. But perhaps the most significant success came in a small town in Oregon, where a Rex Protocol dog identified a respected elementary school teacher as a predator. The identification led to a search of the teacher's home, which revealed a hidden room containing evidence of decades of child abuse. The teacher was arrested, and 73 victims were identified, many of whom had been abused by the teacher over a period of more than 20 years. The success of the program was undeniable, but it came with a cost. Civil liberties organizations continued to raise concerns about the implications of using dogs to identify individuals based on their neurochemistry. They argued that the science, while compelling, was still not fully understood. They worried about the potential for abuse and about the rights of individuals who might be falsely identified as predators. In response, the federal government established strict guidelines for the use of the Rex Protocol. Dogs trained under the protocol could only be used in investigations where there was already probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed. The use of Rex Protocol dogs to conduct random screening of the general population was prohibited, and individuals who were identified by Rex Protocol dogs had the right to independent verification of the identification through other means. These safeguards helped address some of the concerns raised by civil liberties organizations. But the debate continued, and it would continue for years to come, as society grappled with the implications of using science to identify dangerous individuals. 2 years after the warehouse incident, Officer James Martinez made the difficult decision to retire from the Los Angeles Police Department. He was 52 years old, and while he was still capable of doing his job, he felt that it was time to step aside and allow younger officers to take over the work of protecting the city. But retirement for Martinez didn't mean stepping away from law enforcement entirely. Instead, he accepted a position as the director of the newly established Rex Protocol Training Center, a facility dedicated to identifying, breeding, and training dogs for predatory detection work. It was at the training center that Martinez spent his days, working with a new generation of dogs and handlers. He taught them the techniques that had made Rex so successful. He shared the lessons he'd learned from his years of working with his extraordinary partner. And he helped establish the protocols and procedures that would guide the use of Rex Protocol dogs for decades to come. But Rex himself was aging. The warehouse incident had taken a toll on the dog's body, and while his mind remained sharp, his physical capabilities were beginning to decline. By the time he reached the age of 10, ancient in dog years, it became clear that his days as an active police dog were coming to an end. Martinez made the decision to retire Rex from active duty. The dog had earned his rest, and Martinez wanted to spend his remaining years with his extraordinary partner, not in the field, but at home, surrounded by comfort and love. The retirement of Rex was marked by a ceremony at the Los Angeles Police Academy. Hundreds of officers, detectives, and law enforcement professionals gathered to pay tribute to the dog, who had changed the course of criminal investigation. The mayor of Los Angeles presented Rex with a Medal of Valor. The chief of police gave a speech acknowledging the dog's extraordinary contributions to law enforcement. And officers from departments across the country shared stories of how the Rex protocol had changed their work and saved lives. But the moment that meant the most to Martinez came at the end of the ceremony, when a young girl approached him. She was 11 years old now, no longer the traumatized 7-year-old who had been rescued from the warehouse. Her name was Emma Richardson, and she had come to say thank you. "Officer Martinez," Emma said, her voice steady and strong. "I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to thank Rex." Emma knelt down in front of Rex, and the old dog, despite his age and his infirmities, managed to wag his tail. The girl wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, and for a moment, the auditorium was silent. Everyone in the room understood what they were witnessing. A moment of profound human connection, a moment of healing, a moment that encapsulated everything that the Rex protocol represented. "You saved my life," Emma whispered to the dog. "You saved me." In the years that followed, the Rex protocol became standard practice in law enforcement agencies across the world. Dogs trained under the protocol were responsible for identifying and apprehending thousands of predators. Countless lives were saved. Countless victims were rescued and given the opportunity to begin the process of healing. But the legacy of Rex extended far beyond the numbers. The success of the Rex protocol demonstrated that extraordinary capabilities often exist in unexpected places. It showed that the relationship between humans and animals could transcend the traditional boundaries of companionship and work. And it proved that sometimes the most powerful tools we have for protecting society come not from technology or human intelligence, but from the loyal partnership between a human being and an animal who has dedicated his life to serving something greater than himself. Officer James Martinez retired from the Rex Protocol Training Center at the age of 65. He spent his final years with Rex, living in a small house outside of Los Angeles, watching the sunset and reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. Rex lived to the age of 13, an exceptional lifespan for a German Shepherd. When he finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep, Martinez held his partner's paw and whispered words of gratitude for the years they'd spent together, for the lives they'd saved, and for the legacy they'd created. The Los Angeles Police Department established the Rex Memorial Award, given annually to the officer and canine team that best exemplified the values of courage, integrity, and dedication to protecting the innocent. The award became one of the most prestigious honors in law enforcement, and officers and handlers across the country aspired to receive it. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Rex came in the form of a bronze statue, erected in front of the Los Angeles Police Academy. The statue depicted Rex in his classic alert posture, his eyes forward, his body ready for action. Beneath the statue was a simple inscription: "In memory of Rex, a dog who understood his purpose, who protected the innocent, who changed the course of criminal investigation, and who proved that greatness comes in unexpected forms." 20 years later, a young police officer named Sarah Chen, the granddaughter of Detective Sarah Chen, who had interrogated Marcus Holloway, stood in front of the Rex Memorial statue with her own canine partner, a 5-year-old German Shepherd named Luna. Luna was a Rex protocol dog, descended from Rex's own genetic line. She had been trained using the protocols that Martinez had developed and refined over his lifetime. And she had already proven herself to be an extraordinary detection dog, identifying predators with the same precision and accuracy that had made Rex legendary. Sarah Chen placed her hand on the statue and thought about the legacy that had been passed down through generations of officers and dogs. She thought about the lives that had been saved, the victims who had been rescued, the predators who had been apprehended and removed from society. And she thought about Rex, a dog who had understood on some fundamental level that his purpose was to protect the innocent and to serve something greater than himself. "Come on, Luna," Sarah said, turning away from the statue. "We have work to do." The dog's tail wagged, and together, handler and canine partner walked into the night, ready to continue the work that Rex had begun so many years ago. The work of protecting those who could not protect themselves. The work of identifying evil and removing it from society. The work of ensuring that no child would ever have to experience what Emma Richardson had experienced. Because Rex had shown the world that it was possible. And that possibility had changed everything.